We're making a simple project today using the scallop template. Hey quilting friends, it's Carolina Moore, your favorite sewing and quilting YouTuber, and today we are playing with the scallop template. This is a Creative Grids template and it's by Krista Moser. She has a video that shows you how to use this to cut the edges of a quilt, and then you can bind curves on this quilt, or scalloped curves on this quilt. But I thought I'd do something a little different. I didn't really want to bind scallops, but I did want to make a scallop edge snuggie the no binding way. So that's what we're doing. I've cut some art gallery fabrics. This is a gorgeous holiday print, but it's a floral, it's kind of a winter floral print. And this is part of Maureen Cracknell's new line for art gallery fabrics. So I've cut this into a 42-inch square because art gallery fabrics are a little more than 40 inches, so I can get a good 42-inch square pretty easily out of that. And then I went ahead and creased on the diagonal of all of my corners with an iron so that I have that for another step. So I've prepped my cotton fabric, and I have this awesome Cuddle fabric. This is Shannon Fabric's Cuddle, and it's got some really great shimmer to it, and I'm going to use just these two with no batting to make my scalloped edge winter snuggle quilt. And this is a perfect baby gift for a child. It is great for pets, and it's going to look so extra with that scallop edge. I'm also sewing this on my Baby Lock Aria today. Her name is Sunday, and Sunday and I are going to be stitching this up today. I'm using the Aria because it has a knee lift, and knee lifts are phenomenal for when you have to pick up your foot a lot, which when sewing curves and going into corners, you'll have to do a lot of lifting up your presser foot. So I love having a knee lift for being able to do all that. All right, so the last thing that I have handy is I have some pieces of paper. These are just 8.5 by 11 cut in half, so it's 8.5 by 5.5. And these ones are a little bit smaller. These are 5.5 by 6 inches for cutting our corner templates. So I have these pieces of paper, all of my fabric, my machine, and let's get started. Okay, I've tucked my machine to the side for the time being, and we're going to start on our paper units for our scallop template. So I'm just going to line these up, and you want to use a rotary cutter that you've designated for paper, or a rotary cutter with a blade that you are going to be replacing soon, because we don't want to cut paper with our rotary blade and then cut fabric later. Okay, so I have this lined up. I'm just lining up some edges here. And then I'm going to use my rotary cutter to just cut and then what I want to do with each of these is I want to fold them in half so I know where the midpoint is. So we're just folding a nice crease down the middle. I should actually be able to fold a couple at a time, just to speed it up a little bit. It is still a pretty quick project. Okay, so I have 4 corners. You really should only need 2. So now I'm going to cut the curves. You can see on the curves there's a small, a medium, and a large. The whole quilt here is really all about the scalloped edge, so of course I'm going to go with the large, which is this one right here. I'm going to make sure that all of my pages are lined up, and I'm going to actually line up, oh, I got a little bit out of the stack, got unstacked. There we go. Okay, so I've got a little white line down here underneath that too, and I'm lining up the black line right here in my edge. And I'm not going to cut this bottom curve because then I'm going to get a completely different shape. I'm just going to cut this right here. There we go. And I can use this edge I'm again just lining up with that 2.5. There we go. To cut my little extended piece over here. Easy enough. I'm gonna cut a couple more. I still have this on the medium, so I'm just cutting this part right here, my straight edge. Then I'm gonna go ahead and cut my scallop part. There we go. This is my waist. And we're gonna go ahead and start laying out our scallops on our quilt. So I've had to completely clear off my table for this next part so that I could fit my whole 42 inches of quilt here. And we're actually going to do this on the back. Now when you have a larger piece of fabric, it'll pull down your whole project. So I'm just kind of rolling up this bottom piece so it doesn't pull everything down onto my lap or onto the floor, which is not where we want it. So I have my fabric laid out and I have my templates. I have a crease on my template and a crease on my fabric, and I want to lay these together, and I want to give myself a 1/4 inch on the top and bottom. That's a little generous 1/4 inch, that'll work. You can, if you want it to be perfect, you can measure it. There is so much forgiveness in doing a lovey like this between the give that the fabric has and the give that that plush cuddle fabric has, and also the curving of the scallop. It's very forgiving. Okay, so I have that one on that side. This one on this side, again, I'm going down a 1/4 inch, a little generous 1/4 inch from the top. Making sure that's all lined up and giving it a couple pins. Okay, here comes the fun part, and that's laying out our scallop. Now I have a good crease in the middle of my fabric here, so I know where the middle of my 42 inches is. I'm going to take this scallop curve here and kind of, I can move this pin if it's in my way, and I can always repin it later. And I'm pulling the curve of that corner out. There we go. And based on the size that I have here, it looks like in the center of my fabric, I'll have a valley. So how far do I want to kind of stretch my scallops? And I do want to watch that I still have a 1/4 inch up here at the top. That's going to be my seam allowance. So you can measure things out if you want, but the whole point of this design is that you don't have to measure. That you kind of eyeball it and make a really fun looking quilt without having to worry too much. Now if you want to be able to eyeball across the center, I can see this much is overlapping, and I want about the same on this side. So now I can tape these pieces together. If I had a gap between these, I would just grab a strip like this, and I could tape that between to be able to cover that gap. But in this case, I'm liking the way this looks. Looks really good. So I'm going to tape together my template. Super snazzy. Now I'm going to, because I want a mirror edge on the other side, just copy this with another set of template pieces. There we are, and that way we don't have to finesse with it for the second side. I'm just gonna scooch the whole thing over and flip it onto this side. There we go. So now I can tape this all together and I will have the template for one whole side. I have a 42-inch wide, but 42-inch square piece of fabric. And because it's square, that means I can use this exact same template on all 4 corners all the way around, which is perfect. I don't have to recreate the wheel on any of my other sides because I made my project a square. And if I want, I can write 42-inch large curve template. And I can use this over and over again to make more 42-inch large curve snuggles now that I've made it once. So now that I've made this template, I can use it over and over again for all of my 42-inch square large curve projects, which means it'll be pretty easy to whip out a bunch of these snuggly cuddle fabric blankies with no problem. So I have a brand new marking pen. I like the felt marking pens, and I'm using a new one because it's nice and juicy and I want to be able to see this line. And I'm just tracing the edge of my template. There we go. I've gone ahead and traced the entire edge of my template. So now I can remove it. And I'm going to turn this 90 degrees. And I'm going to repeat the process of tracing it on all the sides. If you have pattern weights, you can use pattern weights instead of pinning your template edge down. But we're going to line up that crease line here. Line up the crease line on this edge. There should be a 1/4 inch seam allowance across the top. You can use pattern weights. You can pin it. I'm going to see if it'll just hold for me. And with my nice juicy fabric pen, I'm giving myself a good mark all the way down the edge. I'm going to keep going all the way around. So now I have all 4 edges marked, and this next step I'm going to actually do off camera. I'm going to lay out my nice cuddle fabric right side up, and I'm going to sandwich, and it's just a 2-layer sandwich. An open face sandwich? I don't know. Except we want them right sides together. I'm going to sandwich, except it's just a 2-layer sandwich, no need for batting on this one. I'm going to sandwich my fabric and my cuddle right sides together, and I'm going to pin all the way around close to this curve edge, making it all flat. And I can trim off any extra of my cuddle because my cuddle is bigger than my 42 inches, and I don't need that extra bulk as I'm trying to put this through my sewing machine. And then I'm going to go ahead and sew on the line of my curve all the way around, giving myself a gap for turning. And I will show you that step next. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and take this off camera, and I'm going to pin my layers together and trim up that cuddle so I have a manageable piece to put underneath my sewing machine. So I'll be right back, and we'll sew this up on the Aria. So I have my layers pinned together. I've got my cotton and I've got my cozy cuddle fabric, and I'm going to stitch it together. I'm just going to go ahead and stitch right on the line. I'm going to remove a pin before I stitch over a pin and just go all the way around, leaving myself a good size gap for turning. I want 6 or 8 inches if I can. I might need to make it a little bigger, but the smaller I can make it, the easier it is going to be to close that hole when I finish the quilt. Quilt, blanket, I don't know. You let me know. Does this qualify as a quilt? So I'm stitching right on my line and just removing pins as I go. And if I feel like it's getting out of whack, I can just lift it up, adjust it, and then keep stitching. Now the other question you might have is, why didn't I just cut it instead of drawing the line and then pin it and then stitch a 1/4 inch away? The reason is because as soon as you cut that cotton fabric on an angle, you're going to get bias edges, and those bias edges are going to stretch. And so I wanted to keep the grain of fabric intact for as long as possible. Once we have this all stitched, then we'll be able to trim it up and trim down our seam allowance. But now we can sew without having to worry about bias. So I've only given myself about 1.5 inches, maybe 2 inches here on this edge, and I'm okay with that right now. It's going to help me when I'm trimming this up, and I'll pick out the stitches that are extra to be able to help me turn it right side out. So now that we've stitched all the way around, we're going to clip this down to a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and we're going to clip our curves so that we'll have nice curves on the finished project. And I'm just eyeballing my 1/4 inch. 1/4 inch-ish is just fine. You do want to cut this over something like a surface where you're okay getting lots of fluff, because cutting into a cuddle fabric will get you a lot of extra fur on your workspace. So don't do this right after vacuuming. Do this before vacuuming. I'm just trying to pull away some of this extra fur. Another option is to just shake this right over a garbage can when you're done, and that'll get a lot of that fluff off. You can also just take your vacuum hose and vacuum the edges. Okay, my 1/4 inch here was extra generous. I'm going to bring that in a little more, because if your 1/4 inch is too generous here, what'll happen is you won't get a nice curve. So I'm just going to carefully clip in, and really it's just the cotton fabric that I need to clip. I don't need to worry about clipping the cuddle fabric because it has some stretch to it. If you clip both, that's fine. But we're just going to go and clip all the way around. This one is also extra generous, but I'm just going to let it be. Should be fine with my clips. And I'm clipping a little less than 1/2 inch, more than 1/4 inch. Now your other option, if you want to do this faster, is to grab your pinking shears. So pinking shears already have that clip in there and will help with that stretch. So pinking shears will allow you to just cut. I can kind of just see the edge of my pinking shears right up against the fabric like that. And that will give me a good, there we go. That'll give me some give on my curves. Especially with these larger curves, because we used nice big curves. If you have much tighter curves, you're going to want to be more clipping in. But for these nice big curves, pinking shears are perfect. And a whole lot faster than having to do all those clips. Whew, I made it all the way around. By the end, my pinking shears were giving up the ghost there a little bit. They were saying no thank you on cutting through all those layers. So they've had those pinking shears for a while. It may be time for me to get some new ones in my stocking this year. So I'm just using some little scissors here because I didn't want to get up and get a seam ripper. But you can absolutely use a seam ripper. And we're just opening up one of these curves. And we want to open it up as little as possible because the more we open it up, the more of that curve that we're going to have to close. And that's really going to be the trickiest part of this quilt, is closing that curve. It's not a big deal. It's just a little trickier. So here's a quick tip if you don't want to worry about having to fix a curve later. If you sew your fabric side with 2 pieces of fabric, especially if you're making this bigger than 42 by 42 inches, you can actually put your hole in that seam. And then all you have to do is sew up that seam when you're done, and you don't have to sew up one of the curves. So that would make life easier. I like to reach all the way across to the other side and then start pulling everything through. And there's no batting. And all of this is super flexible, so it shouldn't be too hard to go ahead and just flip this right side out. Oh, I'm loving the way this looks. I'm loving the way it feels. This is fabulous. So I'm just going to go along the edges and kind of tuck out those scallops and those beautiful scalloped corners. So fun. How fun is this? Really pretty scalloped edge blanket. I just need to close up this hole. So as we mentioned, this is going to be a little bit trickier, but you're just going to carefully tuck in your seam allowance and then pin that down, and take your time here, just going around the curve. Make sure that everything's tucked in. Feel free to use as many pins as you want. I'm not generally a big pinner, as those of you who've been around here for a while know, but for something like this where I want everything to get tucked in on a curve like this, I'm going to pin like crazy. Okay, so I have my scallop here pinned, and I'm just going to go around the rest of the quilt and kind of get this to lay smooth. If you want, you can do this on your big flat table or your floor to make sure that it's as smooth as possible. You just want to pull out these curved edges to make sure that when we top stitch, which is going to be our next step, just top stitching, that we don't lose our curve. Nothing gets tucked and left inside. Now I'm going to pin on these. Another option is to just fluff it and play with it while you're sewing. So I'm going to pin on part, show you how that works, and then I'm also going to do part of it without pins to show you how that works. Now when you are sewing this seam, if you were having trouble with puckering, one option would be to use a walking foot instead. And you can also use a walking foot here to top stitch, because there's so much bulk with this fluff, and it's an uneven bulk. In some areas it's a little heavier and a little lighter just because of the way that it has folded back and forth. It can help to have a walking foot, and also Cuddle fabric has a little bit of stretch to it. So between those two things, a walking foot can make it easier so that you don't end up with puckers. And so if you wanted, you could keep pinning all the way around. Again, I'm not going to right here because we are going to get stitching on this, and I'll show you how to do the rest without pinning if that's what you prefer. So we're going to start on the edge that we have closed up, just to make sure that all gets closed up. And we're going to do right up against the edge, a little edge stitch. And we're going to, so I have all my pins in place, and I'm going to do an edge stitch right up against the edge, which is why it's called an edge stitch, all the way around. Again, you can use your walking foot here if that makes it easier for you. And again, I'm using my knee lift because that makes it easier to pivot as I need to. There isn't quite as much pivoting on this because there is now bias. We've cut this and there is a lot more stretch and give in the woven fabric. And so that means that I can kind of pull on these curves to straighten them out a little bit. Let's take a look at our stitching. Yep, it's just giving us a nice, pretty, finished edge. And once this is fluffed up on this side, you won't really see any stitching on the other side at all. So here I don't have any pins anymore, and I'm just adjusting my seam allowance for the next several inches. Stitching pretty close to that portion, and then adjusting the next portion. So it's up to you if you would rather use pins, use pins. If you don't have enough pins to go all the way around, you can pin part and then stop and then go pin the other part. But if you want to just kind of fluff it as you go around, you can totally do that as well. So I've just done some tacking stitches back and forth here at the end to finish it off, and I'm cutting my threads just to hide them. Well friends, that's it. This really fun scalloped edge blanket with fuzzy on one side and So Soft Art Gallery fabrics on the other side. Really not that difficult to make. It's something you can absolutely do in an afternoon, and it makes a great snuggle gift for a new baby. As I send bobbins flying everywhere. But it makes a great snuggle gift for a new baby, or a kiddo, or you can make it bigger. You can absolutely make it in bigger sizes, and you could gift it to a friend. It is such a lovely snuggle blanket, and so extra fancy with that scalloped edge. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments, leave those down below. I also have links in the description with all kinds of information and details where to find the products that I used in this video. And before you go, make sure you're subscribed to this channel. I have lots more videos here that you'll want to see, so make sure you're subscribed and hit that bell so that you know when I have a new video coming your way. Thanks so much for watching, my friends. I will see you right here real soon. Bye for now.